Doom is a series that needs no introduction. But my series does. Welcome to the Quirks of German X, where I analyze the German ports of video games in regards to censorship, voice acting, and other quirky changes. I finished up the entire Wolfenstein series recently, and now I've decided to target another one that's very closely related to it. And because you have eyes and ears, you know that I'm talking about Doom, specifically the two classic titles. We're going to be taking a look at the DOS originals, two of the only ports that were available over here in Germany, namely the Game Advance ones, and even a couple of other censorship quirks. As always, if you enjoy this series, please show me that with a like and a comment, and even consider supporting me directly on Patreon. Patrons get to see new videos 1 week earlier than everybody else. But let's head right into what you're here for and begin with how Doom 1 and 2 were treated over here. Doom 1, released on the 10th of December 1993, just 1 day away from the best date of the year, was put on the index in Germany on the 31st of May the following year. Meaning it was blacklisted and couldn't be sold, advertised, rented, and especially not given to minors, which also applied to Doom 2. This, of course, sucked big time to say it nicely, but it had some hilarious consequences. For instance, publications wouldn't even dare mention the game by name, lest they risk advertising it. But they also wanted to refer to the game instead of pretending it doesn't exist, so what did they do? Why, they just turned every letter of the title into an X, meaning only people that were familiar with the game and its censorship had any idea of what they were on about. If you've watched my German Wolfenstein 3D video, you might recall that this is remarkably similar to how that game was treated over here. And in fact, the reasons for Doom getting indexed were the same as for Wolfenstein. The good old glorification of violence, plus the, quote, socio-ethical disorientation of children and teenagers. In the official statement regarding the blacklisting, they claimed the game contained, quote, realistic and bloody death scenarios, as well as the, quote, practice of targeted killings. Censors speculated that it could lead to a, quote, potential voyeuristic and even sadistic interest in bloody massacre, as well as the idea that it carried the, quote, danger of diminishing respect of life and physical integrity of others. Now, you can't tell, but I am rolling my eyes while reading this. To put all of that nonsense into actual words, game bad because you kill people. When play game, you might kill people in real life. But one aspect made me laugh quite hard when I read it, namely that a, quote, critical evaluation of the aggressive game content isn't possible for the player due to the intense combat. I just love the idea of someone playing Doom, then suddenly leaning back in the chair to stare at the ceiling and going, is it really morally correct for me to kill these demons? Maybe I'm invading their living space and they're just defending themselves. On top of that, the panel members misunderstood or even exaggerated certain aspects of the game, like the claim that it doesn't contain the option to avoid combat or solve problems through non-aggressive means. This is correct, but only for the final bosses of each episode, as you can just run past every other enemy. Plus, considering you're arguably acting in self-defense throughout the game, this shouldn't matter either way. Others are half-truths, like saying enemies turn into living torches when blown up, as well as that within the game's story, scientists and test subjects became insane and started assaulting each other. I can see where they're coming from, it's just not true. And that really shows the problem and even dangers of giving a few out-of-touch people the power to judge, censor, and even ban entire pieces of media that they might not even necessarily understand. Especially since a lot of what they said was based entirely on speculation and not on any confirmed studies, because, as has been proven time and time again, video games don't cause violence. In the end, the game and its sequel were taken off the index in 2011 and thus could be sold again. The reasons were that games had changed a lot since 1994, being far more realistic than Doom in comparison. So the game was deemed not being as appealing to kids and teens anymore, though some panel members still claimed it was. However, the American version of Doom 2 was still banned because, and this will not surprise you, the secret Wolfenstein levels. So only versions of the game that removed said stages were allowed. Well, until 2019, when even the original was taken off the index. In my Wolfenstein 3D episode, I revealed that restricting or banning games based on the inclusion of P-baby imagery isn't actually justified, since video games are exempt from the law that forbids the depiction of these symbols. So that ban was just as unnecessary. On the other hand, not all re-releases of Doom 2 cut off those levels entirely. The first one to feature them was the Game Boy Advance port. Yes, Doom 2 is on the GBA and it plays about as well as you'd expect. It was an impressive conversion for the time, as it kept 100% of the original game's content, unlike most other console ports like the PlayStation and Saturn one. And then of course extended to the Wolfenstein levels, with even the SS enemies remaining intact. Surprisingly, they also still call out Schutzstaffel when spawning you, which you'd think would be an issue as it references some of the worst people in existence, but I guess not. Also, small trivia, these are not the same sound files from Wolfenstein 3D, they redid them for Doom 2 and actually improved the pronunciation. Anyway, the tank shell saw drastic changes however, with the whole crosses of the flags and banners being turned into the Return to Custom Wolfenstein logo, if not getting outright removed. Some of these graphics seem to have been taken straight from that game, which makes them look a bit pixelated and downscaled. That especially applies to the portraits, which replace Hitler with Death's I honestly kind of like these changes because it connects Wolfenstein 3D with its sequel, making the worlds feel a lot larger. And it applies to the Return to Custom Wolfenstein is canon in the Doom universe, at least the GBA one. The next Doom 2 port to feature these stages was the BFG edition of Doom 3. Well, when I say feature, I'm really just talking about the few scraps that actually remain, because while the levels are intact, what's in them, not so much. The SS have been replaced with regular zombie men, but the P-Baby imagery hasn't been replaced with anything, but was just taken out entirely. And really, all it does is reveal just how barren these maps are compared to Doom's other ones. Furthermore, they have also been renamed from Wolfenstein and Grosse to IDKFA and Keen, the latter of course being a reference to the Commander Keen shoot at the end. The reference to the keys and full ammo cheat however makes less sense. And for some reason, even the unique music in them has been swapped with the Doom track that can be found in other levels of the game. This is a genuinely boring way to censor these levels because it's not clever in any way and just feels half-hearted. If you couldn't get some good loot here, they might as well have cut them entirely, because the whole point of them is being able to go, oh Wolfenstein, I remember that. And the last Doom port to feature them is the Unity one by Bethesda. Here, all the hook crosses have been turned into the triangle logo of the regime from the New Colossus. As boring as that symbol is, I have to commend them on putting quite a lot of effort into the sprites, even keeping the same shading. Hitler was also turned into Heiler from the same game simply by removing his mustache. An interesting change is also to the SS, which say Schutzkämpfer, meaning Protection Warrior, instead of Schutzstaffel, meaning Protection Squad. It might sound a tad strange, but it's honestly a remarkably good splice to the original line, and one done by Mike Rubitz, with the same bit-crushed audio quality and everything.
Schutzstaffel, Schutzkämpfer, Schutzstaffel, Schutzkämpfer.
I think the censorship effort is on the same level as the GBA one, as it helps connect the game with the Machine Games titles, which is pretty neat. The only problem is that the regime logo is super boring, making this feel more generic. Somewhat related to Wolfenstein is the hook cross that can be found in Doom's E1M4. It was added by John Romero as a reference to that game, and not as an endorsement of P-Babies. They ended up changing it to a more generic shape in later releases, which was probably for the best. Anyway, before we take a look at some other censored Doom ports, I'd like to address a topic I already hinted at in an earlier video, namely the changes done to the red crosses on the medkits in these games. In the BFG edition and the Xbox Live Arcade versions, the symbol was changed to a red and white pill icon, while the Unity port replaced the cross with a green variant. Now, the reason this was done is because the red cross is actually a quote, symbol of humanitarian protection that's only to be used by the Red Cross organization itself, or it devalues its meaning as a quote, clear distinctive sign of humanitarian assistance and protection. In fact, Among Us even got into trouble for using it in their game because doing so was violating the Geneva Convention. So this seems counterproductive and confusing because surely associating the Red Cross with medical assistance is a good idea, no? Well, not quite. If you don't know, the Red Cross is a humanitarian organization that offers support and relief during times of crisis, disaster and war. The logo itself stands for any quote, person, vehicle, building or equipment that is not part of a fight but is providing impartial assistance, and even translates to don't shoot. So as you can tell, it doesn't just stand for medical supplies, but a vast network of impartial help. Meanwhile, misuse may put quote, humanitarian workers and medical personnel at risk, since the symbol, quote, gives them access to places that may otherwise be inaccessible. Imagine a civilian wearing a Red Cross t-shirt during a war, which would really confuse people that come to them for help. So in my understanding, the symbol shouldn't be trivialized, but only associated with the Red Cross organization itself, not someone patching up some wounds. The Red Cross isn't even aggressive about the whole thing, they usually just ask developers to take them out, which most do without issue. So it's not censorship, they just want the symbol to be respected. As someone who grew up on medkits with red crosses on them, it feels weird to see these replacements, but I have to be honest, they're not bad. The only one I think that doesn't work is the pill icon, because it might look like a type of ammo to players that aren't familiar with the game. But in their defense, it's remarkably difficult to draw an icon that keeps the red color with so few pixels. I tried my hands on a couple possible versions, and even then, only the last one looks good. Plus, if your problem is realism, then the green crosses are actually more realistic. The law doesn't just apply to video games, but even to real-world first aid kits. I'm serious, go look it up, most of them use a white cross in a red or green background. But as I alluded to earlier, let's now take a quick look at 2 ports of classic Doom that actually were available over here, even when the DOS ones weren't. Now, I have to clarify, this game wasn't built for the German market, but just to get a teen rating, which Nintendo was aiming for at the time. But because of the reduced violence, it wasn't subject to the same indexing in Germany as the DOS release. Like with Wolfenstein for the Super Nintendo, I won't be talking about all the changes, as the port is mainly based on the Jaguar one, and most of the differences have nothing to do with the censorship anyway. I'd also like to mention that I got all the sprites and textures via the GBA Total Conversion board made by GFD. If you want to play the game, but on a resolution larger than a post stamp and with more frames than your fingers, then check it out. It's incredibly faithful. On to the actual differences. First of all of the blood has been turned green, though the former humans still keep their blood-smeared clothes. This might sound like a lame change, which it is, but at least the green color is very bright and vibrant, helping it stand out on the GBA screen, especially against the reddish textures of the hell maps. It also kind of reminds me of Action Doom's imps, which is pretty funny. Interestingly, even Doom Guy has green blood, which makes it look more like he's choking on radioactive waste. Now that's an idea for custom death animation. His face in the status bar still has red blood, however, just a lot less of it. It's incredibly difficult to tell though, and I only noticed it while comparing the sprites on my PC. This was likely allowed because it's not glorifying violence, as getting hurt is a failure state that should be avoided. Blood wasn't the only issue however, as certain sprites were redrawn to also remove any gore. For example, the Baron of Hell's death sprites had their guts removed, making it look more like he melted. Enemies also can jib, unlike in the Jaguar port, though the animations for that are in the file still. At the very least, they fly really far when being hit with a berserk power. Furthermore, corpses will fade away after a while, though that could be done to reduce lag. It does, however, make it more difficult to keep track of where you've already been in a level. Though, I guess the alternative would be something like Wolfenstein 3D's GBA port, where frames oftentimes reach the single digits if there's too many objects around. In regards to the decorative gore, some were allowed to remain in the game, just with green blood as well. Others were redrawn slightly to make them less violent. For instance, the hanging leg sprite had most of its blood removed, to the point where I wouldn't even have recognized it as gore. Looks more like a potato sack than anything. The head on a spike was also turned into a skull. This is an entirely unique sprite as well. They didn't just reuse any of the already existing skulls in the game, which means it looks a bit out of place. The same sprite was then reused for the skull shish kebab, which strangely keeps some of the more fleshy looking heads, even one that looks rather bloody. The spike with an impaled zombie man on it had it removed, which means that some levels have random metal rods inexplicably sticking out of the ground. Why they didn't also replace them with the skulls, I don't know. They also took down the corpses hanging on certain walls, leaving only a few shackles behind. The hanging barons still exist, likely due to not being human in any way and featuring green blood in the first place. What completely surprised me is that one of the most violent textures in the game, the Wall of Bloody Heads, stays completely intact. You can even still make out things like organs and spines on it. I'm curious as to why they didn't just replace them with the less gory screaming faces or the tentacles. Also unaffected is the end screen, which doesn't reveal the bunny head on a spike, but rather the image from Thy Flesh Consumed. Doom Guy is completely covered in blood and is still holding the decapitated bunny head in his hands. I mean, they could have at the very least edited out the ladder. And one last change is to the hook cross in E1M4, which has a different shape here, but that's due to the game being based on the Jaguar port. The same goes for other changes like blood pools being turned into lava, which was the same across both versions. In conclusion, I'd say that I'd much rather have green blood than none at all. It also kind of works here lore-wise, as the Baron of Hell clearly already bleeds green, and it's not unreasonable to assume other demons do as well. Even the possessed humans could have been mutated to the point of having their blood change color. The lack of decorative gore makes levels feel rather empty though, even emptier than they already were in the port the game is based on. I think they could have really left more of them in and just turned the blood green in my opinion. I'll say that the censorship isn't what drags this port down, it's mostly the lack of content and low resolution. The missing blood and gore just adds on to it. But how did the game's sequel of the GBA get affected? After all, it was made by a different studio entirely and was pretty much a one-to-one recreation of the DOS version, so did all of that attention to detail carry over into the censorship as well? The short answer, no. The long answer, well, mostly no. Let's get into it. Again, all the blood and gore has been turned green, both on all monsters and on the human characters like the player and the Wolfenstein SS, and even on the secret Romero hat that you can't see without cheating. I kind of like it on the Arachnotron and Spider Mastermind, who I feel look better with green blood since they have such an alien-like appearance. On the others, it's just interesting to see something different for once, especially the Mancubus due to having among the goriest death sprites across both games. I feel it's a bit strange seeing the Pale Elemental bleed at all though. Not just because part of the soul emerging from its body is also green, but because I never interpreted it as being capable of bleeding in the first place. I thought it was more like a gaseous ball, maybe even being made out of rocks or something. This recoloring also carries some quirks with it. Like the Revenant, whose bones are mostly covered in exposed red flesh, despite also bleeding green. Pinky demons also have green teeth, which looks rather silly. On the other hand, Commander Keen doesn't bleed at all, he simply glitches all over the place. The same goes for Doom Guy, who doesn't shed a single drop of blood, not even while dying. The decorative corpses got affected much more though, with almost all of them having been taken out completely, both the sprites and more textures. But I'm not sure whether this was done for the sake of censorship or optimization. It's true that some textures that remained also had their blood changed to a green color, and that all marble pillars except for the one with the beating heart on it remained. At the same time though, can you imagine the Game Boy Advance being able to display all of these hanged corpses on Monster Condo if it already struggles to render the room without them? Furthermore, there's a lot of textures in the game that do have red blood, like certain skin and flesh wars, including the aforementioned heads, as well as the Icon of Sin and everything in regards to flowing blood. So, as interesting as it would have been to see nuke falls instead of blood falls, these go unchanged. Some decorative corpses remain as well, even ones that got censored in Doom 1. Enemies also can't jib in the game, though that may also be to save on resources because many enemies still meet their very messy ends. Likewise, corpses fade away yet again. Though, funnily enough, the Archval can still revive them, so he's less of an evil healer and more of an evil summoner. Is that where Doom Eternal got it from? No, definitely not. However, the worst, most egregious, completely inexcusable form of censorship is something else entirely. They removed the 4-dimensional cube from Blood Falls. How dare they? Alright, I'm kidding. That's because the game uses a different engine. Overall, you can tell that the censorship to blood and gore is at times more aggressive, other times less aggressive. It's hard to tell how much of it was done to optimize the game's performance and how much was done to appease censors. The disappearing corpses are obviously done to reduce lag, but for the decorative gore, it could honestly go either way. It's also a lot more noticeable here because levels aren't as simplified as they were in the first GBA Doom, so the lack of decoration sticks out more. But like I said in my Wolfenstein 3D video, what did you honestly expect from a Nintendo product? It's a miracle that these games exist on the Game Boy Advance at all, especially Doom 2. And at the very least, the lack of gore doesn't make the game harder to play, unlike in German Half-Life. Except for the disappearing corpses, of course. But again, that's not the fault of the censorship. And speaking of that, the way that these games were censored is much more understandable if you understand how censors tick. Considering how controversial the DOS release was because of all the satanic imagery, you'd think that those would see the most cuts, but on the contrary. Because what censors have a much bigger issue with is glorified violence, which Doom obviously falls right into. So by turning the blood into a less realistic green color and by removing decorative corpses that could be seen as using death as window dressing, it's much more acceptable. The problem is just that one of Doom's main gimmicks back in the day was the extreme gore similar to Mortal Kombat. And you can't simply take that out or a lot of the game's identity is going to be missing. Though, one modder did try exactly that. Meet No Ultra Violence, a bloodless Doom mod. As the name suggests, this mod completely wipes away any and all blood and gore from the game. Not replacing it with green blood, but just removing it entirely, which must have taken ages when it comes to enemies like the Mancubus. And I'll be honest, I've never seen anything as terrifying as Doom Guy low on health without any blood. That will haunt my nightmares. Furthermore, all blood splatters are changed to sparkles, gypped enemies simply explode into confetti, and corpses burn away after a while. Even all of the decorative gore gets turned into much more lighthearted things like flowers and hanging rubber chickens. But that still isn't enough, because when this mod says bloodless, it means it. Not only do enemies not bleed, but their clothes are also completely clean as well. Decorative blood that couldn't be changed simply gets turned green, meaning Nuke Force is a thing here, and it looks awesome. They even changed the Icon of Sins textures, and the little Romero head inside simply floats in place. So essentially, they took the censorship of the Game Boy Doom titles to the extreme and then went further still. It's so impressive because of the sheer effort that went into this. This isn't lazy or half-hearted censorship at all, they really committed to it the entire way. It really reminds me of Wolfenstein 3D for the Super Nintendo, and how the German version of Team Fortress 2 got turned into Pyrovision later on. Especially the latter, because even if you have to censor something, that doesn't mean you can't have a little fun with it. But on that note, let's head into the conclusion and see how much these games are affected by their censorship. To make the rating of these games easier in the future, I've decided to revise the scale of German ports and turn it into a spectrum, which is divided into two different axes. The horizontal one, effort, dictates how much effort was put into the port. To the right is high effort, which would be things that require a lot of planning, such as excellent voice acting. On the opposite end is low effort, meaning censorship like merely taking out all the blood and not even replacing it with anything, stuff that is merely an afterthought. The vertical axis, enjoyment, shows how enjoyable the port is overall. A game like Portal 2 has incredible voice acting and doesn't censor anything, and therefore is very enjoyable. This would be the just as good tier. On the opposite side, a game like Half-Life, which has incredibly lazy censorship, is still a lot of fun to play, mostly due to its janky nature and how quirky the German dub is. Therefore, it's so bad it's good. German Half-Life 2, on the other hand, had an abysmal dub that completely ruined certain characters, and therefore made it impossible for me to enjoy it, making it too bad to be good. It's not recommended to play these games unless you want to see just how bad they truly are. And in the lower right would be the meh tier, where games like Wolfenstein 2009 and Youngblood land. Even though they put a lot of effort into them, it wasn't enough to save them from being generic or unfun to play. Where do the GBA games go then? Doom 1 definitely goes between the meh and too bad tier. The censorship felt uninspired and was content with removing things instead of replacing them. It also doesn't offer anything that other Doom games don't, like the Jaguar port, or the PlayStation port, or the 3DO port, or the Saturn port, or the 32X port, or even the Super Nintendo port. You don't need to play this one. Doom 2 lands in the same place, leaning slightly more towards being enjoyable. It's true that the censorship is on the same level, but at least the game is almost completely intact. It even has the Wolfenstein levels, with some new textures that I actually kinda prefer. The only issue is the poor performance, meaning you shouldn't play this game, but not due to the censorship. I'd recommend watching a playthrough of the Wolfenstein levels and leaving it at that. So, what's next in the series then? Well, Doom 3 of course. I'll say right away though, that video is definitely not going to be very long. The game is not censored in any way, so it's going to boil more down to the voice acting. However, there's going to be a lot of voices that you should be familiar with already, but we'll get to that. For now, I'd love to hear what you think about these games. You can tell me as always down below and I'll definitely try to read it. And if you've enjoyed the video, then please leave a like, subscribe, and perhaps even donate to my Patreon. Anything is appreciated. But for now, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and goodbye.